So Jeff Capel's got 2 more spots to fill on the scholarship roster, 2 more transfers. It would seem that he's probably going to bring in, unless he's got some high school secret hiding out there somewhere, which he has done the last couple of years. So it's not entirely without precedent for him to land a guy late in the cycle. But more likely than not, it's going to be those transfers filling those last 2 spots. And so as we look to see who Capel's going to bring in, he's already got 2 guys accounted for in Cam Corrin and Damian Dunn. We'll look how Capel's going to fill those last 2 scholarship spots. And it got me thinking about something we talked about on the live show last week, on the Wednesday night show with me and Jim here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We're talking about Capel's success in the transfer portal. And it's pretty remarkable. I mean, the guy has had like a ton of success. I'm not going to say he hasn't missed, but he's done really, really well. He doesn't have too many misses. When you look at what Jeff Capel has done in recruiting the transfer portal and bringing in transfers overall since he got to Pitt in 2018, he's done a pretty strong job. So I thought we could take a little recap here today, a little review of what Capel has done in the transfer portal so far. Not just this year, but over the past few years, and how those guys have panned out, and maybe even talk about who the best transfer has been, because there's a little bit of competition. There's a few guys you could put on this list. So let's talk about Jeff Capel's history with transfers. Who's the best transfer that Capel's brought in, and how has he done overall in the transfer portal? Here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's Wednesday. It's already the middle of the week. I feel like this week is flying by. I can't believe we're already to Wednesday, but that's how it goes sometimes. Lots going on in the world of Pitt sports, football recruiting, basketball recruiting, transfers on both sports, all kinds of things happening, and plenty to talk about here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Zach Austin made it official, I guess, Monday. We didn't really talk about it yesterday, but he made it official on Monday that he's going to come back to Pitt official. He made it as official as it's going to be in terms of a quote tweet, which counts as I don't know if that's legally binding. I don't know if quote tweets are legally binding, but I think that counts for a that's about as close to a legally binding announcement as we're going to get, I think. But Zach Austin did. Pitt tweeted it, and Zach Austin tweeted it, or quote tweeted it, and Alliance 412 tweeted it. It made it pretty clear that he's coming back. It's effectively the same thing that Jalen Lowe did, and Ishmael Leggett did, and now Zach Austin has done it, and you've pretty much accounted for most of the returning roster. I guess the Twins haven't really had their tweet like that, or Papa Conti or Marlon Barnes, but I think we're sort of all safely assuming those guys are returning. The big returning. You can't say returning starters because Leggett wasn't a starter, but 6th man of the year and 2 returning starters. All confirmed to be back. And so that's a good start, a foundation for the program. And Zach Austin, my thought on Zach Austin, what did he average last year? I wrote this down. 6.5 points, 4.2 rebounds per game. I have a few thoughts on Zach Austin. One, I think it was really good defensively. I think he was really consistent defensively. I think he was good defensively. I think Pitt needed more consistency out of him offensively. I talked a lot throughout the season about those Zach Austin sort of chaos points, the offensive rebounds, the putbacks, the loose scramble drills, and loose balls, and transition, and those kinds of things. Not really running things in the set offense for Zach Austin, but getting production out of him nonetheless. And I think there's a role for him to do that. I think that's still valuable for him to do that this coming season, but I think there's a possibility for him to be more involved as a set piece in the offense. Over the final 5 regular season games this past season, I think he was like 7 of 14 from 3. He made 28 threes on the season, 7 of them in the final 5 regular season games. And again, shooting 50%. And that's over 5 games. So that's a little more than 1 make per game and a little less than 3 attempts per game. If he shoots at that kind of rate, if he shoots at a 50% rate, obviously you'll take that. He doesn't need to make a ton of threes, but he needs to be enough of a threat that teams will have to guard him out there. That they'll have to respect Zach Austin when he steps outside the arc, or he runs down into the corner or something like that. And we've talked about how this team might not have Blake Hinson or Greg Elliott as a sniper 3, although Brandon Cummings might have an outside chance of becoming that. But they should have a lot of guys who are dangerous enough that opponents have to respect that, and a bunch of guys, maybe more than they've had in the past. I think, when you look at Lowe, Leggett, and Guillermo Diaz-Graham, potentially Austin, you bring in Damian Dunn, who can make shots from outside. He wasn't a great three-point shooter, but he could be in that 33-34% range, which would, I think, be perfectly good for what Pitt needs this season. Cam Corrin only attempted like 2 threes this past year, but he's shown in the past that he can at least make those shots, so maybe you get a little bit out of him. And so you'll have this sort of very expansive three-point attack that might not necessarily have any one guy that when they line up outside the arc, the bench is yelling, shooter, shooter, shooter. But you just have a lot of guys that if you get them the ball with a little bit of daylight, they can make a shot. And I think Zach Austin can be that. He fits maybe that 3-and-D role. But I don't even like relegate him to the 3-and-D because I feel like he can do more, on rebounding. I think he can do more, with his athleticism and making plays that way. I think he can do a lot. He's just got to be a little more consistent. And they talked about it all season long about Zach Austin losing focus or not being consistent enough. And that's where he needs to step up. But I think he's a good piece to have back. I assume he'll return to the starting lineup. And, we'll see how the minutes all shake out. Dependent at least at some point on who else they add in and what the rest of the roster looks like. But I'm sure Zach Austin will play a lot. I wouldn't be surprised if he increases his averages, like I said, 6.5 points per game, 4.2 rebounds per game. I think he can do better than that. And I think when even if you get increased rebounding out of the center position with Cam Corrin, and even if Blake Hinson's rebounding dropped a little bit last year and Ishmael Leggett and I think Bub Carrington were the top 2 rebounders on the team, I still think there's an opportunity for a guy like Zach Austin to step up in a rebounding role and increase his rebounding and do better there and have more of an impact because I think he can be a really good rebounder. So that's a good bring back for Pitt, getting Zach Austin to not go into the transfer portal. I think he'll be a good player for Pitt this season. And, of course, he came to Pitt from the transfer portal. And, we talk a lot on Panther-Lair.com about who Jeff Capel is targeting for those last 2 scholarship spots. We've talked about a couple of guys. There's one name in particular we've discussed a lot. And if you want to join that discussion, you should check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, to get all the Pitt sports news and coverage and conversation on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. But, in light of adding Cam Corrin and Damian Dunn, in light of potentially adding more transfers out of the portal for the last couple spots, I thought we could look back at the guys like Austin, the transfers that Jeff Capel has brought in. Now, inevitably, this list I came up with, I'm going to miss somebody. I went through each roster. I thought I found every transfer that Capel has brought in. I might have missed one here and there. But here's what I came up with. 12 total transfers over the course of Jeff Capel's time at Pitt. This predates the transfer portal, which I think really the transfer portal era really kind of started around 2021. 21, 22. I think for football, Jordan Addison left in the spring of 2022. He was getting, there were attempts to poach him prior to that. So I think right around that era, that was when Jeff Capel brought in his first transfers prior to the 2021-22 season. And so, and I think that's when it really took. I meant to look up when the transfer portal actually start. When it actually became a thing. But NIL became a thing in the summer of 2021. And I think the portal sort of came along with that. And so Capel actually got 4 transfers before it was a transfer portal. Guys that had to sit a year. For transferring, they had to wait a year before they could get on the court. And, unless they were a graduate transfer, like Sidney Nadir, the first transfer that Jeff Capel brought in. Nadir, if you recall, he was an interesting guy. He came in knowing that the guard spots were pretty much full and he was going to be a reserve, but he came in to be that reserve role. He averaged 20 minutes per game, almost 6 points per game, a little less than 2 assists per game. Jeff Capel also brought in Eric Hamilton from UNC Greensboro. Remember Eric Hamilton? Played 31 games, started 20, averaged about 16, 17 minutes per game, 5.5 points, 4.4 rebounds per game. Eric Hamilton, I'd forgotten about him, actually. Ethiel Horton, of course, a transfer from Delaware. Came in, had to sit a year. When he got on the court, he played in 35 games at Pitt, started 26, averaged 9.2 points per game. But, of course, his time here was marred by a 19-game suspension for an incident, a legal incident, in November prior to his, presumably final season here. There were some sort of public and very visible blow-ups between him and the coaching staff at different points that didn't look good. I think he walked off the court at one point, or walked off the bench, walked out of the gym into the locker room at one point during a game, maybe at the end of a game. And he was a guy who, when he was on when he was not playing, when he was not eligible to play, when he had to sit out that year for transferring, I mean, they couldn't say enough good things about how impressive he was, how impactful he was, and how much he was going to play and how good he was going to be. And he ended up being fine. But the problem with Ethiel Horton is that he never really, it seemed very rare that he would actually sort of accept his role and do the things that they actually needed him to do that he was good at doing. He always wanted to be something that he wasn't, and that hurt the team when he would do that. So he would settle in and just sort of play his role, and they would get into a groove, and they would be pretty good, and then he would step out of it, and it would all fall apart. He ultimately transferred to UCF, where he averaged 12 points per game and made 34 starts, and then spent this past season, presumably his final year of eligibility, at Texas, where he averaged less than 6 points per game. And then Nike Sibande, the last of Pitt's pre-portal transfers under Jeff Capel, unless I'm forgetting someone, which I very well may be. Nike Sibande came in from Miami of Ohio. You remember the whole saga. He missed the first 14 games, or only played 14 games or something like that his first season, because Miami of Ohio was holding it up. And that was a challenging situation. He missed a whole year then with an ACL injury 2 years later. He ended up playing in 50 games, only made 10 starts over the course of his career at Pitt. I was a little surprised by that number, but I mean, he was a reserve, and certainly didn't want to be in that role, but made the most of it as a sixth man of the year 2 years ago. He averaged 8 points per game and 3.8 rebounds per game. He was better as his career went on. I think he had more of an impact in his final season than he had at any point prior to that, certainly coming off the injury. But it was a good addition. Probably the best of these four. Not probably. He was the best of these four, even though Ethiel Horton averaged more points per game at Pitt than Sibande did. I would say, I think for the total package, when you look at all sort of elements of it, I think most people would agree that Nike Sibande was the best transfer of the pre-portal era for Jeff Capel. But then you get into the portal era, prior to the 2021-22 season, and that's where you start seeing the heavy hitters coming in. The guys, the big-time players, the guys like Dan Oladapo. Yep, Dan Oladapo was in that first transfer portal class. Came in from Oakland. I meant to look this up. Where did he end up? He was somewhere. I think he went to North Carolina Central. Did they make the tournament or something? I forget. They had some significant game. I thought this past year. Maybe not. Maybe I'm misremembering. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Dan Oladapo came to Pitt, played here for 1 year. Started 4 games and played in 15 total, averaged 10.5 minutes per game, 3 points, and a little under 2 rebounds per game. Not a lot there, but of course, there were other guys who came in that transfer portal class who were far more impactful, like Mo Gee. Good old Mo Gee, 32 games played, 9.8 points per game, 6.3 rebounds per game, shot 36% from 3, made 43 three-pointers after transferring from Stony Brook. Mo Gee, it's unfortunate that Mo Gee was on that team and not the next year's team. It would have been a lot of fun for Mo Gee to have been on one of the really good Pitt teams. The last 2 years, when they made, making the NCAA tournament 2 years ago, and then having a lot of success, winning 20 games again this past year. Mo Gee was a great kid and a fun player to watch, and you wish he could have been part of a good Pitt team instead of the team that he was a part of in 2021-22, which was still a bit of a mess. But he transferred in, only had 1 year of eligibility, so he didn't get an opportunity to be a part of that. Jamarius Burton, on the other hand, did get a chance to be a part of it. Wichita State transferred to Texas Tech, transferred to Pitt in the 2021-22 season, played 2 years at Pitt, started 60 games out of 64, averaged almost 34 minutes per game, 14 points, 4 rebounds, 3.4 assists per game. His final season, his averages were 15, 5, and 4. He shot 48, almost 49% from the field. Jamarius Burton had a whole lot to do with the renaissance and the success of 2 years ago, making the NCAA tournament. He was, there were a lot of guys that you would say, and it's hard to pick one that you would say was the most important, but Burton was a leader for that team, and I think in his own way. And it was always interesting when they would talk about how, in 2021-22, maybe he didn't feel like his voice was really getting heard, and so he just stopped trying to lead. But with a new group around him in 22-23, I think he tried again and was able to get it across, get the message across. Other guys listened to him, and his teammates listened to him and followed him, and I think he set a lot of the tone for that team and the success that they had. That was, the biggest land out of the transfer portal to that point, or transfer at all to that point for Capel, was Jamarius Burton. But of course, the next year, you got 3 heavy hitters, or 2 heavy hitters and 1 solid contact guy. Nelly Cummings, Blake Hinson, Greg Elliott. And I think, even if you want to say that Elliott wasn't as good as Cummings and Hinson, he still averaged 10 points per game. He still shot almost 42% from 3, averaged 4 rebounds per game. He started every game here on an NCAA tournament team. You talk about 3 home runs in Nelly Cummings, Blake Hinson, and Greg Elliott. Capel killed it with that portal haul. And I almost, I'm reading stats. Like, you don't need me to read stats for Nelly Cummings and Blake Hinson. You know what those guys did here. You know the success that they had, and you know how well they played and how important they were to the success. And there's a theme that emerges here, and it carried over to last year's portal class with Ishmael Leggett and Zach Austin. And I think it's carrying over to this year with Cam Corrin and Damian Dunn, where if you look, you could go through all the portal guys. Those 8 guys that they've gotten out of the transfer portal: Dan Oladapo, Jamarius Burton, Mo Gee, Nelly Cummings, Blake Hinson, Greg Elliott, Ishmael Leggett, and Zach Austin, right? 8 guys that they've landed out of the transfer portal. And I would say, other than Oladapo, every one of them has been a hit. And you can debate, would you really call Zach Austin a hit? I think he fit pretty well in a team that won 20-some games and was, this close away from getting the NCAA tournament. And so, yeah, I would say he did pretty well. Was he as good as Blake Hinson or or Nelly Cummings or even Ishmael Leggett? No, but I would be hard pressed to call him a bust. I would say out of those 8 guys, Oladapo is really the only one who didn't contribute, and 7 out of those 8 are varying degrees of either long doubles, hustle triples, or straight up home runs. And I think most of them are straight up home runs. Jeff Capel has killed it in the transfer portal over the last 21, 22, 23, 3 years. Over the last 3 years, I think Capel has killed it over, in the transfer portal. And what he's done and what his staff has been able to do, they've been able to find the guys who fit. And I think that's important. On the court and off the court, they found the guys who fit. They haven't just gone and got the best player available. They haven't had the NIL resources to go get the best player available, and that's, it's not always an option. They might have kicked the tires on some of those best players available, but what they were able to do was find the guys who they could fit in the NIL budget and who fit with the team, fit on the court, understood their roles, and fit off the court in the locker room. Like Burton. What are you going to do with this guy who's transferred twice, didn't really do much at Texas Tech? I don't know. Can he really play at this level? Nelly Cummings, he's been in the Ivy League forever. Can he really play at this level? Blake Hinson, this dude hasn't played in 2 years. Can he really play at this level? Mo Gee, this weird, long, gangly guy from Stony Brook, can he play at this level? Greg Elliott, dude at Marquette. He seems like a decent shooter, but I don't know. His numbers aren't that great. Leggett from Rhode Island, Austin from High Point. And it's not atypical to find low major and mid-major guys who transfer up to the high major level and have success. But it is remarkable to me that Jeff Capel has been able to do this like he has. I mean, unless obviously Elliott came from Marquette, and that's kind of power 6-ish in basketball, and Hinson obviously played at the power conference level, the high major level, with at Ole Miss and Iowa State. But really, if you consider Elliott, wasn't in a power conference, and Hinson wasn't playing basketball at all 8 of these guys they've gotten out of the transfer portal. Well, I guess Burton, coming from Texas Tech, is the only one who came from a power conference. And they've all succeeded, some to considerable degrees. And I think it's pretty remarkable to look at that list. And it almost sort of gives me, you get a little extra benefit of the doubt with the transfer guys that you do go after, because you've had so much success with the guys that you've gotten. They've gotten to where they've gotten, back-to-back 20-win seasons, making the NCAA tournament for the first time in a long time. They got there because of the transfers. And, they came close to repeating that success, partially because of the freshmen they recruited, and also because of transfers, And I think the success they have this coming season, it's going to be Jalen Lowe. That's a big part. I think Brandon Cummings can play a role. Obviously, the twins will be involved. But a lot of the success is probably going to be coming from Leggett, Austin, Cam Corrin, Damian Dunn, and whoever else they might land. Now, Jalen Lowe is going to be a huge part of that. I don't mean to gloss over that. Jalen Lowe is going to be huge. But again, the transfers are, Capel has found a way, and his staff they've found a way to find the guys who fit really well. And I think they've done a pretty killer job of it over the last 3 years. Even if they didn't get the big name guys or the big NIL guys, they've got the right guys, and they've turned it into success. So that gives me a little more confidence about Cam Corrin and Damian Dunn and like I say, whoever else they might add. And when they do add more guys, we'll be talking about it right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That's our video channel where we put all of our Pitt video content, these daily morning Pitt videos, our weekly live show that we'll do tonight at 8 o'clock. And anything else we might have, video interviews, practice highlights, press conferences, all those kinds of things. It's all right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and that way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I appreciate it. It's fun talking about some of these portal guys that Jeff Capel has gotten, because they were all really good. And that's, it's always fun to talk about those fun topics. They can't always do that, but we had an opportunity to do it today, so I'm glad you tuned in for it. I enjoyed it. I hope you did as well. Hope your week's going well so far. We made it to the middle of the week. I hope you enjoy your Wednesday. Like and subscribe, and we will catch up with you tonight for the live show at 8 o'clock and tomorrow for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.